国际的礼仪我应该要讲中文，不过我先让我们的朋友懂英文知道说我要讲中文。So our guests and honorary speakers, tonight could you please let me use the very formal etiquette to speak with Chinese Mandarin? Please. Okay, then I will translate to you sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph. 各位来宾，真的每一次在这样子的一个座谈当中，其实我都觉得非常感动。当我拿到每一本书，因为这是台大出版中心出的书的时候，其实你所接触到的是页数，但是我接触到的是努力、汗水，甚至是泪水。不仅是作者非常辛苦的用他们的智慧来刻画这本书，那我们的责任编辑当然还包括我们的非常不简单的这一个译者，其实都贡献了非常多的心力。所以当我在触摸这本书的时候，而且特别是触摸到读者非常反应热烈的书的时候，其实我内心充满了感动。那我相信今天晚上会是一个既富有知识，也富有智慧，也富有感情的一个傍晚。那我再次感谢大家能够今天这样热烈的参与，来到校史馆。事实上，对我来讲，对我这个世代来讲，这里是旧总图，更令人怀念。那接下来我就1分多钟的时间，告诉我们的来宾我在讲什么。我想齐丽莎博士还有我们的姜老师都知道我在讲什么的。So let me speak in English to summarize what I said in the past 3 minutes. So I say, every single time I touch your book, in particular, the book was written with wisdom, with efforts, and the book was edited with great efforts by the translator and our colleagues. I deeply feel moved. And I think tonight will be an evening full of wisdom and full of love and full of warm responses. So, best wishes to the success of tonight's gathering. Thank you very much, particularly to Dr. Evans. Thank you.
Actually, I haven't spoken English for a while, so today I prepared a note to ease my nervousness. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, welcome to this academic event. My name is Wen-Yu Chiang, currently a professor of Graduate Institute of Linguistics at National Taiwan University. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to chair this forum today. The reason for holding this forum is because the National Taiwan University Press published a heavyweight work, Dying Words, Endangered Languages and What They Have to Tell Us. This is one of the very few linguistics books published by academic institutions in Taiwan in recent years, which is in line with Taiwan's current emphasis on multilingual development. I would like to thank the National Taiwan University Press for its willingness to publish this book, as well as the joint efforts of Professor Nicholas Evans, the author of this book, and Ms. Cai Yaji, the translator, for the successful publication of this book in Taiwan. We are very pleased to have Professor Nicholas Evans, the author of this book, come to our site today and personally talk about his views on the revival and development of endangered languages. At the same time, we also invited Professor Elizabeth Zeitoun from Academia Sinica to interact with Professor Evans. The topic of today's forum is into our minds and across the seas, tales from the Library of Babel. Let me start with a brief introduction about Professor Evans. Professor Evans is a distinguished professor of linguistics at the Australian National University, and he also directs the ARC Center of Excellence for the Dynamics of Language. Professor Evans is a member of the Australian Academy of the Humanities, the Australian Social Sciences Academy, the British Academy, and a recipient of the Annelies Meyer-Forschung's Prize and the Ken Hell Award from the Linguistic Society of America. His driving interests are the interplay between the diversity contained in the world's endangered languages and the many scientific and humanistic questions that can help us answer about human history, culture, mind, and society. Professor Evans has published extensively, focusing on lexicography of minority languages coupled with rich fieldwork experience. He has published more than 200 scientific papers, focusing on advocating the value of multilingualism and preserving minority languages. He has made outstanding contributions to national languages. His popular book, Dying Words, Endangered Languages and What They Have to Tell Us, is the concrete result of his many years of fieldwork on many minority languages in Australia, America, and Africa that the general public pays little attention to. Through these discussions, readers can deeply understand why the preservation of multiple languages, especially the value of endangered languages, can also be more convinced of why humans need to work hard to revitalize languages. Now let us welcome Professor Evans with warmest applause.
Is it working? What about now? Is it okay? Yeah. Many thanks for your very warm welcome to all involved. And I'd like to just start by telling a little bit about the origins of the book. The talk is going to be about the contents of the book, but this version of the book, which might be the best version yet, I think, had interesting origins. Namely, I was giving a talk in Hong Kong at the invitation of Professor Wang, who is here tonight, and he's one of my linguistic heroes. So it was a wonderful moment and an honour. And during dinner, afterwards, we began talking about the possibility of translating it into Mandarin. And Qing was there and began this long and arduous task of translating it. The original plan was to publish it with commercial press in Shanghai. And I think in this environment, in Beijing, thank you. Yeah. In this environment, I can say, and you will understand, that a particular problem came up with one page on a book. One of the maps you can identify in the book itself, which showed Formosa as part of China 3,000 years ago. That wasn't something I was willing to see it appear in the book. And so things slowed down with commercial press, ostensibly for technical reasons. And after a couple of years of hearing nothing, I renewed the contact with Liu Qing, and she proposed to approach your press to publish it. And I'm very grateful that that happened for many reasons. Firstly, as you can see, National Taiwan University Press has done a wonderful job in every sense of doing it. But also, some of the stories in the book have their origins here in Taiwan, and that will be part of what I'm talking about tonight. And I think Taiwan as a country is a country that's beginning to take seriously the challenge and the richness of its indigenous languages. So I want to express my heartfelt thanks to all concerned, but especially to Yaqing for her really wonderful job of translation, and to Lauren and Yaqing from the press for really fine editing work that made me wish I had that sort of skill and dedication from the original publishers. So thanks for all of that. Now I'll pass to the actual talk and I'll leave. The book has a wonderful Chinese title, as you know. I won't attempt to reproduce it, but I want to explain that the original version of the book was dying words, which in English has an ambiguity of words themselves dying. I wanted to avoid the idea that whole languages die, but also once the last words on leaving this world, what really matters. But then quite a lot of indigenous groups felt that this wasn't a very good title, that there's been too much talk of extinction, cultural extinction, and so on. And also the book's not just about endangered and minority languages. There's some big languages in there like Japanese and Turkish and so on. So hence the new title. And the cover of this edition is a very clear blend of both colours. And I want to mention again my thanks to Yaqing and this nice quote I love by Jorge Borges, that el original es infiel a la traducción. The original is unfaithful to the translation, which is certainly the case here. And just to stay in the realm of Jorge Borges, one of my favourite pieces of literature is his short story, The Library of Babel, where he talks about this imaginary library, a vast, infinite hexagon with every possible book in every possible language, with every possible script. Some of them are just rubbish, of course, but some of them contain the solutions to the deepest truths only found in maybe one book in the library. And it's this metaphor of the Library of Babel that I want to draw on in this talk, because if we go to the library, the university library here, or my institution in Canberra, this is itself an ex-library, we'll find some vast areas of shelves with thousands or maybe millions of books written in English or Chinese, and some languages which don't even appear there. And yet, the wisdom of and knowledge of the speakers of those languages could be expanded out. If we think of libraries not just in the form of written languages, but nowadays in the form of all sorts of multimedia things, videos of people telling stories or singing and so on, we should regard our library as taking that form as well. And someone else who used the library metaphor was the wonderful Malian Senegalese writer Amadou Hampâté-Bâ, who said that an old person dying is a library burning. That's part of the traditions of West Africa. And we are living through a time when all over the world libraries are burning down. The wings of libraries are burning down as languages are being lost or reduced to one or two speakers. And I just want to give you one poignant example of the sort of thing that's happening. So this is from a North Australian language called Margu. I'll just listen to it first of all.
La Arapuini, Magatirita, Maura Murder, La Kamu, La Puini, La Mundo. Mukul Singalisa, Tahu Tiringawan, Manatonica.
So that was a recording of a language called Marbu, now no longer spoken. This lady here, Hazel Mumia, was recorded in 1962, and I came across some cassettes recorded then. And in the process of working on another language, Iwaja, I tried to find Marbu speakers. No one alive could still really speak it. But this lady you can see in the blue shirt, Joy Williams, was someone I was working with Iwaja with. I sorted through the recordings, and among 6 speakers, this lady had the clearest voice. You could just tell it, even without knowing the language. And I played it to Joy and said, "Can you understand any of this?" And she burst into some mixture of tears and laughter and said, "I can understand everything. That's my mother." And then, thanks to her help, we were able to transcribe some of that language. But that's just an example, one from hundreds or perhaps thousands around the world at the moment of languages which are disappearing. We talk about there being about 7,000 languages in the world, and they're not distributed in the way that the area of countries or populations are distributed. So the map on the right shows countries that have been scaled according to the number of autochthonous languages there, or indigenous languages there. So the language, the country with the most is Papua New Guinea, Indonesia with the second most, Vanuatu, which I'll talk about in a second, has very many, and so on. And for example, it's a little bit hard to make out Taiwan here, but it has quite a large size thanks to all of the indigenous languages here. Here's Vanuatu, which is per capita the most linguistically diverse country in the world. It has a population of 320,000 people, nothing, population of a small Taiwanese town, with 135 languages, plus English, plus French, plus Bishlaman, which is the 3 national languages. So every language has around 2,500 speakers. In Vanuatu, the languages are pretty safe. People continue to speak them because there's a national policy that favours what people call custom, traditional custom, and there's a very accepting attitude to multilingualism. People speak many languages. And I should add that these 135 languages all belong to the Austronesian family, which the languages of Taiwan also belong to. So language diversity, these 7 or more thousands of languages around the world can tell us about many things, and that's, I try and cover these in my book. Deep history, I'll be saying a little bit about that tonight, especially from cultures that lacked writing. So there's many parts of the world where our best understanding of deep history comes from what the language can tell us. Traditional biological and ecological knowledge transmitted through individual languages. Often languages are very, very finely tuned to local ecologies. The variability of language itself, this is more a topic for linguists. I'll say a little bit about it, but not so much tonight. The evolution of human concepts, everything that we use, what we think of as basic concepts with which we think, have come from somewhere, and we can trace their origins through language. I'll say a little bit about counting and number systems tonight. Then the interweaving of language, culture and thought. Speaking a different language means thinking differently, remembering differently, attending differently, feeling differently. And we can now start to explore some of those things experimentally in psycholinguistics. And then what people create with language, special forms of poetry or story and so on, language games which only work for a particular language, just as in Chinese there are tone patterns which are used in particular forms of poetry. Obviously in English we don't have those because we don't have tones to arrange in this way. I'm not going to talk about that tonight, but there's a whole chapter on that. So let's talk about this idea of a deep history of ideas, and an obvious, important one is numbers. And we can think of it being rather obvious that numbers should be based on the number 10, with 10 fingers, or perhaps 5, with 5 fingers in the hand, or perhaps 20 if you add in the toes. Not obviously 27, but in the Oksapmin language of Papua New Guinea, that's how you count. You start with the fingers of one hand, you keep going, there's some stopping points along the way, up the arm, the shoulders, the ear, you get to the middle, which is the nose, and then you keep going down the other side. So by the time you get to the other side, you have words that mean things like other elbow, other wrist, and so on. And when you get to the end, when you get to 27, you say tik fu, which means a whole cycle has been. Well, why not? Mathematically, there's no reason why 27 is any more cumbersome than 10. It's just we're used to with 10. And what's interesting about this is that we don't think of English and Chinese as similar languages at all. In fact, if you ask an English speaker or probably a Chinese speaker on the street, what's the language most different from yours? An English speaker will probably say Chinese, and a Chinese speaker will probably say English. But if we look at the number systems, apart from the fact that one's written in characters, it sounds very different, and the other's written in Roman scripts, the logic is almost the same. Base 10, and then you build up from the 10s to get into the teens, like 13 and so on. And then you have multiples of 10, and then you add on to that, for example, 36. And then you have powers of 10, like 100 or 1,000. Okay, Chinese is a little bit different, that you've got 10,000, which we don't have in English, and 100 million and so on, but that's a very small wrinkle. Compared to this, basically similar logic. And we can just see it when we look at the words, which words are short, which words are long. The short words, after you get to 10, are the easy words to reckon with. And we think that that's what's easy to calculate. Anyone can calculate 10 times 10 or 10 times 100. To ask someone to calculate 27 times 27 or 13 times 13, that gets more difficult. Now, in Nen, which is the language what Papua New Guinea work on, they have a base 6 system. And you get up to a word called kus, which is like 6, which is like 10 in English or Chinese. Then you count multiples of that. So 12 is an easy number, it's just like 2 6s, and 18 is an easy number, 3 6s, and so on. Then you get up to 36, which in English and Chinese, well, you've got to have 3 morphemes or 3 characters, but in Nen, it's just ta, just a single complicated syllable. And then you get up to 100, nice easy word in English and Chinese, but in Nen, it's there's somas, bakta, somas, bus, somas. So 2 36s and 4 6s and 4. That's how you make up 100. On the other hand, 216, which isn't an easy word in English or Chinese, is just taromba in Nen. Or 7,776, which is complex in both English and Chinese, is weremaka in Nen, 6 to the 5th. Okay? So we can think of this as a metaphor for how languages have evolved down different tracks. We shouldn't just assume that our brains are hardwired to use powers of 10. That's a historical evolution that's occurred in some societies and not in others. In other societies, the evolution has been to the power of 6 for interesting reasons that I don't have time to go into. So that means that when we go into another language, we go into another world. And there's some beautiful sayings about this, the Czech proverb that for each language you know, you're a new person, or Edward Sapir wrote that no 2 languages are ever sufficiently similar to be considered as representing the same social reality. That is the reality you presume to share with the members of your social group, not necessarily the same objectively. And each language is exuberant in some ways. It forces you to pay attention to a lot of things. English is obsessed with definiteness, with tense, with things like that. If an English speaker learns Chinese, they don't have to worry about that, but they have to worry about shape classifiers, things like that. So each language requires that you pay attention to different things. And then other things, it just doesn't care too much about. You can say them if you want to, but you don't have to. Now I want to give you another example of, first of all, how a language can be different, and secondly, how we can investigate that using the tools of psycholinguistics. So Kaida was the first really different language I began to learn. It's an Aboriginal language. This lady here, Maimuna Nafi, adopted me as her son, so she's my tribal mother, and this is my uncle, Pluto. When you speak Kaiut, almost every sentence you have to locate with respect to the north, the south, the east, and the west. So instead of saying hello, I say, Dinani Gawaju, where are you going? And an answer might be, for example, Dirpuru, to the north, or Rarabu, to the south, or whatever it might be. And then, if I'm sitting in a car, for example, I'm telling someone to move over this much, just like in English, I might just squeeze over a little bit. I might say something like, Jirkarewa, become a little bit in the north, for example, or depending on the direction. Or if I've got 2 or 3 people I'm talking to, or my uncles, and I'm saying, oh, do you know what I should be doing? Ask this one, right? Ask your east uncle. That is the one who's in the east in that particular row. And this last one, I had to give instructions to Pluto to get into a very small plane one time, and he wasn't sure how to get in. He wasn't used to flying in a plane until I said to him, which means, literally, squeeze yourself in arse first from the south. It's all clear. And for each of those 4 compass directions, there's a huge set of different derivatives, very precise. I'm not going to go through them all, but just an example. Rilumilumi in the dugong grounds to the east, or Rilujulik, move something to the east, or sleep with your head to the east, or Ringkari, at the boundary you meet moving from the east towards the point of speech. And the boundary could be the steps, or the entrance to this building, or whatever, it was some sort of discontinuity. Now, a lot of Australian languages do this. And 2 anthropological linguists, Steve Levinson and John Haviland, were both interested in this and did something a bit before their time. That is, in the 1980s, they were making films of people talking, which unfortunately not many linguists did at that time. Independently, each of them recorded the same story told by the same man about when he was out in a boat and a shark came up and capsized the boat. So they recorded this same story in different places. I'm going to have to put down the microphone just to demonstrate this. So I'll just talk a bit louder without the microphone. So in the first one, the man told the story, he said, and then the boat turned over. And the second time round, he said, and then the boat turned over. So the reason he did that was he was facing in a different way each time. And if you speak a language like this, using the wrong gesture, the wrong direction is lying. You're giving inaccurate information. So you have to use the right gesture all the time. But what does that mean? It means that everything that happens to you, you have to remember what's north, south, east, and west, because maybe 30 years later, you'll have to tell someone. So it's not just about what you think when you're speaking. People talk about thinking for speaking. It's thinking for remembering and attending for remembering, because you will be called upon to ask them. So it's in this way that language trains our way of thinking, because it trains our what we have to pay attention to. How can you test this? I wrote about this, and sceptical people who believe in sort of universality might say, well, it's just a superficial thing. Maybe they don't know that at all. So Steve Levinson and his colleagues designed some clever experiments to look at this, because after all, that was just an anecdote. So one of their tasks was to get speakers of different languages to look at a table laden with some little plastic animals. So some little sheep, a white one, and a grey one, and a spotted one. So they just look at the sheep, okay? Remember, they're laid out, now come with me, and they, without telling the person what they're doing, they just lead them around into another room, rotate them through 180 degrees, and say, now, here are 3 sheep, hand them 3 plastic sheep, put them out, how you remember them. Now there's 2 things you can do. You can look at the sheep there, and you can think the white one's on the left, the spotted one's on the right, the grey one's in the middle. Or you can think the white one's, let's say, to the south, the spotted one's to the north, the grey one's in the middle. Because you've been led through 180 degrees, you will lay them out differently according to your solution. So the first one we can call a relative response, that is relative to you, on my left and my right. The second is an absolute response, relative to the earth, the north, south, east, and west. So it's also a difference between just thinking egocentrically and thinking geocentrically about the earth as a whole. And what they found was that people who speak absolute languages like Guyimidir or others in other parts of the world, so this is a language from Botswana called Aikon, and the same thing. Here he is looking at the table. In this case, it's not a room, it's just in the desert, but there's another table, he gets led around, and he lays things out in a way that reproduces the original scene. So what we find is that it's not a 100% correlation, it's a very strong correlation that if you speak a relative orientation of English, I'm pretty sure Chinese is like this too. I don't know about Formosan languages. They memorize and reproduce scenes on a relative basis, but if you speak an absolute language like Kaya or Guyimidir or Haidlong, you memorize and reproduce them on an absolute basis. Now our pass to another part. That was into the mind. Now we go across the seas. And I just want to tell one of the stories I tell in the book about how lining up the evidence from multiple languages can line up witnesses that take us deep into the past. And there's several language families I talk about in the book. One is the Australian one that I'll talk about here, but I also talk about the relationship of some languages like Apache and Navajo in the United States, and languages in Siberia, and also about the migration of Roma people from India to Europe. There's many stories one can tell, but this is an especially fascinating one. So the Austronesian language family, as it's called, Southern Islands, not necessarily the Southern Hemisphere, as you know, you're not in the Southern Hemisphere, you're further south than many other places in the world. This language family contains 1,200 languages. So somewhere between a fifth and a sixth of the world's languages. It's a stupendous number. And they occupy a giant part of the Earth's surface. If we could time travel back to the world 3,000 years ago and look at where different language families were and say, who are the most successful people in the world, who settled the largest part of the world, overcome the most difficult challenges to get there, we would say the Austronesian languages, because they covered every part of the inhabitable surfaces of the Pacific and much of the Indian Ocean as well. From Madagascar in the west, the originally to Easter Island in the east, and from here in the north down to New Zealand in the south. A huge, huge area. And how do we know that these languages form a family? We know it for many reasons, but the most approachable one is that we can look at lists of vocabulary and we find words we recognize. What linguists call cognates, that is, words that are the same because they've come down from common ancestry. So if I'm from speaking English, for example, and I say brother in English, and then in German, Bruder, and in Russian, brat, you can recognize the similarities. If I go to French, frère, or Italian, fratello, it's a little less obvious, but we can line things up and show those sorts of relatedness. And here we've just got 7 from the 1,200 languages of the Austronesian family that we've got. Tao, or Yemi, from Orchid Island, and then Tagalog in the Philippines, Malay, Chamorro in Guam, Maori in New Zealand, Tahitian, and Malagasy. And then here in the right column, we've got Proto-Austronesian, which isn't a real language, it's a reconstruction of a language, a deduced language, by putting together words for a whole lot of these words. And we can see, for example, that in Malagasy, way over there next to Africa, the word for child is anaka, and in Tao it's ana, in Tagalog it's ana, and so on. For the humble louse, the first domesticated animal is kutu in Tao, and then kutu in Malay, kutu in Tahitian, kutu in Maori, and so on. We could look at each of those. It's not always the case that every language has a reflex of that word, but most languages do. And we can find also, what's really important, that there'll be certain sounds which change in systematic ways. So, for example, the word that means 5 or hand comes out as lima in Tagalog, Malay, Chamorro, but in Maori, L and R go together as a sound, just like in other languages. And so that becomes rima. And other words which have an L in other Austronesian languages have an R in Maori. So, as in any family, families have branches, and you can deduce what the branches are by seeing what's in common to the members of each branch. And we've been able to build a family tree of Austronesian. The most amazing thing, because this here shows a sort of family tree, it's 1,200 languages. We can think, okay, they divide into branches. Think of it as like a clan and subclans. Well, there's one clan that we call Malayo-Polynesian, which includes for most of just Tao, plus all the rest. That's Malayo-Polynesian. So people, we think, left from there down to the Philippines and kept going. The other, Elizabeth will tell us the current view of exactly how many there are believed to be. I don't know, are you thinking now, what's your best view? I know it's debated, right? How many other branches here?
Anyone?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard figures like 7, something like that, are all here in Formosa. So most of the deep time diversity of Austronesian language is here, even though not most of the languages are here, but most of the deepest information we have is here. So Taiwan is completely the key to understanding this, and we can see there as being a number of steps in this expansion. First, within Taiwanese, one group where the pioneers who set out, got down to the Philippines. From there, one branch, if you like, headed down southwestward through what's now Indonesia, but also around the coasts of Vietnam, so the old Cham civilization. The refugees from there went to Hainan Island, for example. Another branch skirted around the north coast of New Guinea, lingered on this northeastern part of New Guinea, where a sub-branch that we call Oceanic was born, along with many technological innovations, like the first outrigger on canoes and other things. La Peter Popper, say something about that. Then from there, people went down into Solomon's, which until 3,000 years ago was the edge of the known world. That was as far as humans had ventured in the world until 3,000 years ago. And then once the Austronesians arrived with this superior sea technology, they went from Solomons down into Vanuatu, one branch down into New Caledonia, another to Fiji, and out into Polynesia via Samoa to Tahiti and so on. And from there, one branch went north to Hawaii, one branch went east to Ranganui, East Island, and another branch came down, ending up in New Zealand relatively recently, approximately, I think they said 1,000 years ago. So we have each of these branches. To understand that, we have to put together the linguistic evidence, because languages don't give us dates, unless they're written, but they give us information we can use for inferences, and we can put together archaeological evidence. People arrive, pottery arrives at a certain date. We can do genetics on human populations, on other populations that were in the canoes, like rats, for example. You can do rat genetics and reconstruct that family tree. So this is just one little chapter in that Austronesian story. When people got to the northeastern corner of New Guinea, they spent about 500 years there, adapting. One thing that's very distinctive about the Austronesians was they were people who were ready to marry and interact with the people who were already where they were, in interesting ways. So often Austronesian women would marry local men, but incorporate them into their own societies. And there was a lot of technological transfer of crops in both directions, of techniques, of boat building, of pottery, and so on. While people were here in northeastern New Guinea, this oceanic branch formed. And one branch of that went north into Micronesia, like Guam and so on. One went west along the coasts, and then one went down into the Solomons. And the interesting thing is when we get to that branch, oceanic, we can line up descriptions from lots and lots and lots of languages and make very, very fine reconstructions. So we know, for example, that people had baskets with fish traps that they called pupu, that they had special sorts of trolling lures that you put along behind a boat that they called baya, that they had tapa beaters that they called piki, that they had lime spatulas for beetle nut that they called brahma, and many others. And you just can gather words from many languages, check out the sound correspondences, check out the meaning, look at records from local museums, local communities, what missionaries and anthropologists and other people recorded to reconstruct this. So we know an immense amount about the world of the Proto-Oceanic speakers 3,000 years ago, probably more than we know about any language family spoken then. And we also know a lot about Proto-Austronesian, although their things are much more complicated because there's a lot more time depth. Here, for example, is wanga, which is canoe, and that's a word which can be traced like that to here in Formosa, in Taiwan, and as it went along, it was refined and developed in various ways. So by the time it got to that part of New Guinea that I showed you, people were starting to put on outriggers, and all these little stars, asterisks, they show us that these are reconstructed forms, words that we deduce by seeing a lot of descendant words. So we know that the mast was tuku, layout, the sail, the mus was the bailer, the anchor was dull, the sail wheel was tira, and so on. A lot of elements. When people reached Fiji, they lingered there again for some hundreds of years and developed the double outrigger canoe and some navigational techniques. And that was what allowed the migration out into the far Pacific. So that's the end of the sort of historical part of the story. But I'd just like to stay in the Austronesian world and talk a little bit about ecological management, which relates to another theme of the book. Languages are disappearing around the planet. They are disappearing for many reasons, and communities often want to hold on to their languages. Not in all cases, but often they do. And the question is, how can that be accomplished? A very important part of that is just giving value to the knowledge contained in those languages and in those cultures. And one very vital part of that knowledge is ecological management. How do people manage their distinct ecologies? And I just want to give you a little example from the Solomon Islands. So this is the beautiful Morobo Lagoon, where the Morobo language is spoken. And one of the many special things about this is it's not just that they have precise words for fish in the way that the Linnaean taxonomy, or now we can do the DNA and work out how fish do, but we also need to know how fish behave. That affects the ecology, that affects fishing, that affects how they interact, affects how we find them if we're fishing. And in Morobo there's about 15 words for different fish aggregations, different schools of fish. So there's ajara, there's large schools of fish, heads down, sucking in the sand, filtering out and eating tiny plants like mullet and goldfish. And then avara, seabirds and skipjack or other tuna moving together close to the sea surface in pursuit of bait fish. I won't do these all. But japa, large schools of predatory fishes that patrol an area or drift near the surface, apparently looking for food. There's many others. So if you are someone who's interested in fisheries, maintaining fish stock, fish ecology, all of that, you need a fine knowledge of this. And we can send in the scientists, they can start their observations now or 10 years ago. But people in Morobo have been watching fish for 3,000 years, learning about them. Have to know that because they fish. And their observations often go well beyond what we think of as Western science or universal science currently knows. So, in principle, knowledge like that can be incorporated into a school curriculum. So that, for example, here in the Solomon Islands, when you learn biology or ecology, it doesn't have to be just something that's imposed and brought in from outside and the experts in some other part of the world have said X, but you can incorporate local knowledge that is there in your parents and in your grandparents and your ancestors and so on. And this is an important part of giving value to local languages, because then people see it not just as a language, but as a vast body of knowledge. So where are we now in this situation? There's been a lot of support over the last couple of decades for language documentation. That's continuing, you can do a lot, but even with so many people involved and good resources, only around 10% of the world's languages have halfway decent documentation. And what this word, the logosphere, just like the biosphere, the logosphere is the world of words, it risks vanishing without trace. So we need more of all sorts to support this sort of endeavour. And when we think about what threatens minority languages, of course it's always a disadvantage to be a small group of people. You don't get the same resources. But probably what's worse is what we might call a monolingualist mindset. Usually speakers of big languages, English or Mandarin or whatever, think that you can only learn one language. If you have another language, then it will somehow diminish, take up the brain space that you could have used for English or Chinese or whatever. But often in small-scale societies, that's not the way things are seen. It's seen as completely normal to learn multiple languages. In the part of New Guinea and in the part of Arnhem Land, where I work, an average adult will speak 5-6 languages fluently. This is someone with maybe no school education whatsoever, and then would understand several others beyond. And also go on learning throughout life. There's no idea that you have to learn languages as a child. And there's this idea of what we can call two-way education. It's not a choice between the universal so-called scientific or whatever model and local knowledge. There's many interesting forms of interaction. And this beautiful metaphor, which gets used in Yolngu communities of northeastern Australia, is Gama education. So the metaphor of Gama is that if you observe closely, where a river flows down into the sea, the river water comes down at high tide, or rising tide, salt water pushes it up, they mingle together, and there's a special area of mingling salt and fresh water where particular fish, particular plants are to be found. And it's in that, the word Goma refers to that area of mingling. And I think we can take that as a beautiful metaphor for the enrichment that comes. It's not just in the morning, learn your mother tongue, in the afternoon, learn English or Mandarin, but also think critically about how those two touch each other, how they're different, the extra calibration that comes from putting them together. So this can involve local communities in many ways. So here on the left are some documentation from Marquesas in French Polynesia. On the right from part of Brazil, where people from Quikuru community are recording their own language, the things which they most value, and transcribing and so on. And this man here wrote his master's in his own language at the university in Brazil with an abstract written in Portuguese. And in the process he had to develop a lot of special terminology. But once we record things, we also have to archive. And there's various archives which are beginning to be developed. We can think of these as the safe places, the safe libraries to put these things, so that even if an old person might forget something or be lost, still the knowledge is there somewhere. In Australia, we've got the Paradisic archive, this Library of Babel, with the architects of that. There's something that's called Anavevo, which is another Austronesian word, the Cave of the Echoes in French Polynesia, which Jacques Van and his team have been developing. There's Isla for the Americas and so on. So we're now at a crossroads, four-way crossroads, I think is how we can see it. We've got an accelerated loss of languages, that's happening. But just at the moment when this accelerated loss is happening, we're seeing how much information of incalculable value is there. I think there's many countries, Taiwan is one, Australia is another, where people are just waking up to see, that is the broad public, just waking up to how vital these languages are. And beginning to think, oh yeah, there's some place for these traditional languages in education. And there are benefits to multilingualism, even if it's about your own language, not necessarily the big international language that we use for trade. And the fourth element is rapid technological developments that allow us to do a lot more. We can record things, especially with video and other things, in ways that we couldn't begin to think of, say, 50 years ago. And the example with the gestures in Google Unity, Steve Levinson and John Hamlin were doing that. Very few linguists were doing that thing, whereas nowadays it's pretty standard. So which way are we going to go? We, in the broadest sense of we. It's a challenge that we face, and it will take many types of people to meet it. Community members who care about their language, linguists, educationalists, biologists, archaeologists, technologists, many other sorts of people. So that's where I leave my stories, and there are many people I would like to thank who live up here, but I don't want to take more of the evening because I want to leave space for other things. So thank you for your attention.
Professor Elizabeth Zeitoun is currently a research fellow linguistics at Academia Sinica. You received a PhD in linguistics from Paris Descartes University. Her research interest lies in the study of the Formosan languages and Formosan linguistics. Her work has revolved around four major research activities. First, research on the Formosan languages, including Zhou, Wukai, Saisha, Bunu, Ataya, Bazek, Puyuma, and Yami. Second, historical linguistics. For example, the comparative study of Wukai and Pen reconstructions based on Formosan language data. Third, building of the Formosan languages archive. And the fourth, training of Aboriginal assistants. These languages include Wukai, Zhou, Saisha, Ataya, Bunu, Taiwan, Sete. She received the National Science Council Outstanding Research Award in 2011 and the Ministry of Science and Technology Outstanding Research Award in 2016. Now let us welcome Professor Zeitoun with the warmest applause.
First, I would like to thank you for inviting me here to be Stephen's discussion. I'm very honored about that. Second, I would like to say that I read the book, and at first I didn't take notes. Each time I thought, oh, that's a great idea. I will use it maybe when I do this and that. And then the next day I started reading something else, and then I think, oh, where did I see something yesterday? I was interested. So my opinion is, if you read this book, have a pen with you and make notes. This is very important. Otherwise, you're going to be lost in there. But there's so many stories and so many things that there's really a lot of things you can take and learn from. Today, I'm going to not respond, I might respond a little bit as I am going to unfold this PPT, and I would like to maybe talk more about the Formosan languages. I don't know who is in the audience. I don't know how much you understand about the Formosan languages, but I think there are also a lot of things you can say about them. I have my own opinion about how many languages there are in Taiwan, but maybe the government does not agree with that. I heard that today, the Siraya, again, there was a meeting for them. I don't know the outcome yet. I don't know what happened, but I know this is the Mandarin Wukai. And they are part of the Wukai, but they want to split from the Wukai. And when they ask why, they say we don't understand the other languages, the other dialects. But they don't understand because they don't speak the language anymore. So of course they don't understand their own language and they don't understand the dialects that they used to understand. And I once was having dinner with them, and I said, "You need to agree that we're going to split off." I said, "No, I'm doing linguistics. So your history, you write it, but my ideas about what is linguistics, I do it my own." And I said, "So then don't return to our village." So sometimes it's also very, very difficult how you talk to people. I'm quite very straightforward, and sometimes it poses some difficulties. So let me tell you a little bit. I thought about so many things. I wanted to talk about onomatopoeia and idioms in Saisha because they are so funny. But then I thought, that's so difficult to explain. I'm not going to be able to explain them in just 5 minutes. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to talk about the reputation and the social context and the evolution of the indigenous societies and why now we have this shift to other languages or the laws of the languages. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the irritation, the documentation work we've been doing, because I think though we're not very successful, we still have a little bit of production. And then the linguistic classification we were talking about, and then some funny aspects about the Formosan languages, because I think sometimes it's good also to be a foreigner and look at these languages, because then you think about your own language and how you could, interpret certain data. But sometimes I think linguists should also be anthropologists, because if you don't have the anthropology, you sometimes just miss the point. So let me first talk about this. This is, we saw the map from Nicholas, and Helen is up north. And Yamé is not part of the Formosan, we call them Formosan languages, so the languages, Austronesian languages of Taiwan, but they are part of the Yamé is part of the Malayo-Polynesian. Yamé is also known as Tao. So from the linguistic point of view, we linguists believe we have 15 languages and 44, I believe they have 44 dialects. Why? One of these dialects was skipped out, Ilan Creole, because it is thought to be Japanese language, but actually we don't know. There are 4 different villages with different variation about the use of Japanese in these use of Japanese in these villages. So this is still a question. And we have a language, Kahabu Bazin, which has not been officially recognized. So I count it as one of these 44 dialects. Then we have one dormant language, which is Siraya. What is Siraya? This was the first recorded Formosan language, but it became extinct maybe in the first part of the 19th century, around 1835, and it has been revitalized for about 30 years, and Sander de Lara, who's been working on that language, making grammar, has been instrumental in making people aware of the beauty of this language, and we are trying now to teach it at school. So we say it's dormant because nobody can speak it as a real language, but the children are learning it. So if they are able to teach it to their own children, then maybe it will be revived. What I want to say here is that we have also a lot of most of the Western Plains tribes, they are completely extinct. But I have trained a lot of Aborigines for a long time, and I had someone who was outcast. Until now, she believes our language is still spoken. And when I have to tell her, but remember we went to the field and we could not get even one word. Why? They can tell us, yes, but we sing the language. We still use it. So it's also something different when you are a native, when you're a descendant of these heritage languages, and when you are someone who is out of the community. So when you're within it, you think, I'm speaking the language. But actually that's not totally true. And again, it can be difficult to explain to people that actually their language is not there anymore. As you said, that's extremely complicated. Regarding, you were talking about Anak, and I thought about it. So many languages, they have this reflex of chai Anak. For example, in Lukai, Lalako comes from Anak, the capital N becomes L. But I thought about it and I thought, well, in Saisha we say koring. What means koring? Koring means to beat, and koring, to beat often. And the child is called koring, beat often. In Taiwan we say kakarian, which is the small one. So that means that this word, anak, which originally was in Proto-Polynesian, has been replaced in some of these languages. The government believes that there are 16 languages and 42 dialects. And we have Telugu and Sakisaya recognized as languages, and Pasay and Kahaku, which are not officially recognized yet. Unfortunately, we lost the last Kahaku speaker in 2021, but I was able to have my student finish the grammar on this language, and he graded last year. And we lost a near native speaker on August 31st this year. And we were able also to get some data from him. But sometimes you don't know where are the speakers. It's very, very difficult. So this is another problem. And if the government does not recognize these languages, Taukas, I would say, is really extinct. But until a few months ago, was still spoken. I mean, there were still people able to speak it. So this is for Nicholas. I think most of you know about the history of Taiwan, so there's nothing to say much about it. What I want to say is two things. First, there were the first big changes when the first foreigners came to Taiwan. I don't want to use colonizers, and then the second big change is when the Japanese came. And when the Japanese came, there were a lot of things that changed. They forbade certain traditions. They asked also for certain things to be done. And also because there were so many uprisings, they moved populations around. So populations were already moving around for search of food. But when the Japanese came, they would just move, entire families. So, for example, there was a repression in the Saisha tribe in 1902, and my informant is her name is Gao. She was also my student, but she's also my collaborator. And she said that they were moved from one area. The whole family was moved from one area to just another area, and from another area they were moved back to that area. And at the same time, they introduced other population like the Atayal. And last month, in August, I wanted to do some field work and see whether the Atayal have been, taking after the Saisha, whether they have borrowed words. And though I understood a little bit about history, I had not thought about how much, how do you say that, the impact of this history. We went to see, my informant was following me everywhere and seeing the Atayal. But we went to the tribe that was introduced by the Japanese to counteract the Saisha, and they were very ferocious. And when we went to ask them about, we were talking about, having long words and whatever, they were only recounting, stories about the repressions, about how they combat the Saisha. That was horrible. I never expected fieldwork, to become two societies together, just, telling me about, what happened a century ago. So here again, we have really to be very careful. After the arrival of the Western Ren, this is when the languages started to disappear, and there was really a shift. I could already see the shift when I started working on Lukai in 1992 because I was told so. And I could see that. I could see the children were not talking. So when the Council of Indigenous Peoples was created in 1997, I used to go everywhere, every day, to tell them, give me one people in one tribe. and then I will train it, and then it will make the job. It will train other people. But people didn't see the urgency. Now I think maybe I was too young. I was only 30, and maybe I didn't have enough energy, to talk to politicians. And it's regrettable. I was able to train some people, but not that many when looking back at it. And now what is happening is that this is really language lost. Each time I was not able to do fieldwork because of COVID for about a year. And it is really very visible that the languages are being lost. People of my age, they usually don't know. They say, wait for my father, for my mother, for whoever is older than me. And they don't know how to speak. So this is really a problem. Another problem is that we had a lot of natural disasters in the past few years. And because of that, the government just decided to move again the populations into the place, whether they want it or they don't want it, but they had to move because of the dangerosity of the soils. And sometimes by just moving out, they also lose their culture or their language. So this was not my informant, but on top of it, it was one of my wonderful informants. She was from Yu. And on August 8th, we lost Namo Hata, who was the person that wrote the vast dictionary ever on any Formosan language. I mean, we are doing a dictionary on Saiyan, and our aim is to do, what it is. It's really very good. Even better than the Blast Dictionary itself. On August 30th, we lost a very, he was younger. He was only 67, the last known speaker of SA. And the list goes on because in between it was Thai speakers or whatever. So that's really difficult. Now, this was made by Tsushida and Sukida in 2007, and when I look at the map, I thought, wow, they were really very good, because actually what they say, they tell you where the languages are extant and when the languages are endangered or potentially endangered. And I think that after so many years, I think I would say Puyuma is now really critically endangered, but usually the map is really, the way they stated it is quite nice. It's quite nice. So about the heritage, it is true, as you said, that now we have realized how important it is. And I think it all started in the early 90s, and I think there was a lot of combination of a lot of factors. One of them was the society was more open. That was the end of the martial law, and also we were able to have the NSC that were giving us fundings to do research, and also we have groups that were working together. So with a lot of people, we did these first sketch grammars in 2000. Actually, we wrote them in 1995, and 20 years later, we were able to do other sketch grammars. Though they are a little bit different, we're not so much familiar with how to write grammars in 2000, but much better. In 2016, they are all trying to introduce the language to the speakers, and also to introduce the language to those who want to start, to have a start of the languages. And then with Lilian Huang, who was the head of these grammars, said maybe we should also try to show people how to teach. So we go into revitalization, and this is why we did word classes. And these books were much more difficult to write, because actually try to define word classes, this is already very difficult. And we thought, quite stupidly, that maybe we could find, a lot of resemblance. But actually they are all completely different from one another. So we never agreed, on how it worked. But anyway, we did these books. So we don't have that many reference books, and I'm trying to work on these. Many of my students, at least 3 of them, have been working on reference grammars, the grammar of Sarawak, grammar of Bolon, and the grammar of Kahabu. So I'm quite happy about that, but I think there's much more work to be done, and I'm also trying myself to work on that, on in-depth grammars, because this is, I think, one of the ways you can say later on, you have some material to revitalize the languages. Now, let me talk a little bit about the classification. Plus says we have 10 branches, and 9 are in Taiwan. So Anis, for example, is part of the East Formosan. So we have a Kayana, East Formosan, Kuyuma, Taiwan, Hokkaido, Guangdong, the Western Plains, Northwest Formosan, within there's section there, and Malayo-Polynesian. Of course, there might be problems because we don't really know what are the Western Plains. I mean, we know where they are located, but actually whether Konya is really a language or whether it's an agglomeration of different languages, this is still under discussion. And of course, this is by looking at Mata, that Nicholas gave, that we can see that, for example, when you have Taiwan, you have the C, and the capital C, and it becomes T in other extra Formosan languages, including Yame, as you saw. And then when you have 3 total, it becomes it's T in Taiwan and in other extra Formosan languages. So this is the interesting part. Actually, there could be some more about whether with whom the Austronesian, Proto-Austronesian is related. But here I won't discuss about it. This is very complicated. So now let me give you some funny aspects regarding the Formosan languages. And I thought about giving you things I said about onomatopoeia and about ideophones, but I thought that was too difficult. So I chose other aspects. First, I wanted to give you the numerals. So this is what Nicholas said, from 1 to 10, and then I gave you 20. I was very happy about this 20 because actually I showed to class that actually was Ma, and then you have the capital N, it becomes N. So if you look at Punon, we have a quite nice language where you have 1, 2, 3, and it goes like, you know, the Proto-Austronesian. And if you look at the 10, 20, 30, you look at, and you have the Ma N. And this is a language which is quite regular in that respect. There are some other languages that are not that regular. But what is funny and what I want to talk to today is about Saixia, because you were talking about, you know, you can have 20 with, sorry. Wow. Yes. Okay, we'll see. So 20 in Saixia is actually 2 hands and 2 feet, so 1 person. Yeah. But this you would not know if you don't understand the language. Sha is, because usually when they say 1, it is a hat. So you're going to tell me what is Sha about. Sha is the bound form of the numeral 1. And Yeh is actually the form Ma Yeh, which is 1 with the person. So Sham Yeh means 1 person. So you really have to understand the morphology, and you really have to understand the, you know, how it agglomerates together to give you Sham Yeh, 1 person. This is the only known language that has 20, which is completely different from what we reconstruct usually. And Saixia is also interesting because we have sort of these 6 plus 1, and 4 multiplied by 2 and 10 minus 1. So if you look at this, you have your half, and you have, I think it's cashback, of course, that half. And then when you have 70, 80, and 90, you do the same. It's just that there, they use the mon, which is the tens, and then they add 6 plus 1. 4 multiplied by 2 and 10 minus 1. So this was also to talk about the numerals. We don't have any basis. We have a few languages, the Western languages, they are known to have a basis of 5, a base of 5. And then there's one language that has a base of 20, is the Favalan language. But I'm not sure whether that's because it was reported by foreigners or because that was really what was in that language. We don't have any other language that works like this, and this language is peculiar in having 20 as one person. Then I wanted also to talk about ethnonyms. Ethnonyms are also something which are very, very funny, I think. Usually you talked about Yami Dao, and actually it comes from Proto-Austronesian Zao. And this is usually the way people, if you ask them what are they say Zhou, which also come from the Zao. But these are languages that either use a place name, a particular place name. So if you ask the Sai-Shiat, what is Shiat? They don't know. But Shai, for sure, we know that it means come from. So come from Shiat, and Shiat, we don't know where it is. But some other languages, they use something else. And Kuyuma is one of these languages that has been using something else. So I was telling you that the Japanese, when they came, they changed the structure of the population, the societies. Kuyuma proper used to be referred to as Nanwang population and Penan Dawang. And, well, there's a history about it. But then we have Kuyuma coming out. And the term Kuyuma actually, we think, comes from Ku'uma. Ku is the reconstructive form for to be sent, or the causative of movement. So Ku, to be sent. Uma is the reflex of Uma, which is the field. So that means to be sent to the field. And we think that at one point when the Japanese came, they decided to have the men not going to the hunting anymore, doing agriculture or doing, with the women. And the men did not like it. So they were obliged to give up some shamanistic traditions, just, to follow the conventions established by the Japanese. And I think they called themselves Uma. And then because it is difficult to pronounce, so you have Kuyuma. Actually, the Kuyuma don't like this word, and they have been trying to change it in other words, Kuyumayan. And Josiane Cochran, who is coming very soon to talk about the Kuyuma, my colleague said, well, we have changed Kuyuma for Kuyumayan. I said, I'm not sure she's going to accept it. Kuyuma is the way they were called, and then now it's called Kuyumayan. Well, we'll see. So, but anyway, this is how we can also learn from languages and how people react to certain changes in the society. And there's something else I want to talk about, and this is also funny. This was the first language I worked on, Mandarin Bukai. In Mandarin Bukai, we have Baro-Baro, which means young woman, and Abaro-Baro, and it means young women. But it can also mean sweetheart. And I thought about it a long time, and then I realized that in that society, when they made courtship, they could not say who was their girlfriend. So there was a lot of men coming to a women's home, and the men were on one side, the women on the other side, and they would not be able to say, who is the Baro-Baro. So they would say Abaro-Baro, which is the plural form, a kind of a more polite way of saying, sweetheart. Of course, we have the same for young men and sweetheart from this case. Also, sorry, there was something else I wanted to talk. In Mandarin, they have 5 different ways of calling father. And this is also something that has been really giving me a lot of problems to analyze at the very beginning. At the very beginning, we have tama-tama. We have, for example, amari, amaho, ama, lama-adama, lama-adama, and amaku. Actually, each of these forms always refer to father, but in different contexts. So if you refer to someone who is about 40 years old and has the age of being a father, you will say tama-tama, and that refers to a man. But if you say amari, ama-o, then you're referring to someone's father or to your own father, and you're talking about your father, referring to him. If you say ama, it's always your father. I cannot say Nicholas ama. This is not possible, only mine. And then if you say lama atama, then you are referring to one father and his child, so either son or daughter. But if you duplicate, then it becomes lama atama tama, and one father with his children, so boys and girls, or only boys or only girls. And then if you say amaku, then you're calling him amaku. Yeah. So that's also very funny. I spent a lot of time trying to understand how this was working. And ama is also a cognate from Proto-Austronesian. So that shows you how language can evaluate and can, transform from one cognate to become a lot of things. And that's the end of my discussion. Yeah.
Now we can move to the Q&A section, and I would like to invite all of you to raise any questions. And if you feel shy to speak English, I could translate for you.
Hello, I want to ask Professor Chiang. I think Austronesian language is actually very important with their culture and how the descendants could find their own identity and their own culture. I don't know if you understand what I mean. Culture is thing, yeah. For example, like Sydney, they have a culture like Gaia. So for the CD teenager, they have to have ability to cut the enemy's head, and also the Atayas women, they have to tattoo their faces so that means they are adults, and then afterward they can go into the rainbow bridge. So also like they have very many traditional like harvest fest. So they don't need to memorize their own language into characters when they are sing the songs to worship in the harvest fest, and their ancestor. Their grandmother and fathers can teach and pass down these songs to their descendants. So I think how to let these descendants to have the interest to learn this language from their ancestors. One method is try to teach their own culture. That's very important. Also, now because the strong power of the Western language are just like Japanese or the Deutsch, and they will set up many language center and institutes in Taiwan, and the people try to send their children to learn this language. So how about we can also try to set up more Austronesian language institutes and make many funny movies or songs to build up more indigenous teenagers to learn these languages and pass down this traditional culture. So we can preserve these endangered languages more efficiently.
Well, this is a difficult response. I think that you don't teach the culture. You have to live it. I mean, if you're a Sedef, you just live one certain way and you're going to follow. One problem is whether you want to show them, whether you are proud of your own culture, and whether you want them to be proud of it. And this is what I was saying. In 1997, I used to go to the Science Council, Council of Indigenous Peoples, at that time, Council of Aboriginal Affairs, and I used to tell them, give me one in each community, and I will teach them, I will show them, because it's quite easy. They just had at that time to go back to the elders and ask, and the elders were so happy. Now we are missing the elders. I just showed you a few pictures, but I have many. Most of them, I think, Nicholas might have the same experience. Most of my informants in nearly all the languages I work on have passed away. So this is one thing. Another thing is whether usually you don't teach the language, you speak it. So if they don't have the use of it, they're not going to understand why should I learn the language. And this is something also you need to make them proud. The problem is, I think it's in the Taiwanese society, this is something that has been changing over time. And I once said when I was at the parliament, if you don't show them that you respect them, why do you not want them to respect their own, culture and language? So I think it's very tenuous. It's very difficult to explain. But first, it comes from oneself. Are you proud of what you are? I mean, being a virgin, and are you willing, to be an virgin? Now, change are changing, so I'm very happy about that. There's a lot of different treatments and a lot of so maybe the children now that are born now, this generation will feel like they are virgins. My first assistant, who was Rukai, when she came from Kaohsiung to Taipei, she would never say she was a virgin. She could not say I'm Rukai. That was very difficult. Is that the same in other populations?
I think there's a lot of things going on, and I'm ignorant about the situation in Taiwan, so I don't know. You mentioned tattoos. For example, if you or someone else wanted to get tattooed like your grandmother, walk down the streets of Taipei like that, is that something acceptable, or people would just stare at you? Would you feel proud and able to do that or not? Or just speaking the language in a big city, would you feel people were staring at you or not? There's lots of these small decisions in daily life that affect whether a language gets spoken. And often the older generations, they might feel that they're making a disadvantage for the younger generations if they don't speak the language to them. They might think, oh, I have to speak Mandarin so that they get ahead in life. Or maybe they will speak the language but only at home because they think it will be shameful to speak it out in the street. So there are a lot of emotional things like that. Where there have been more successful efforts to bring languages back, I might mention two examples which I think have been fairly successful in Hawaii and in New Zealand with what they call language nests, where very young children, they go to a school nursery or something like that with people of the grandparents' age, where that's still possible. And then the grandparents they skip the middle generation who haven't learned the language and pass it on to their little children. And sometimes families that have committed, that they've just said, okay, we're going to bring our kids up like that, they have succeeded in doing that. And in Hawaii, for example, there are schools that have deliberately adopted a curriculum where Hawaiian is the main language, or the first language that's taught, but that's integrated with traditional Hawaiian practices, agricultural practices, sailing. When you finish your high school, the exam is to build and sail a boat. People learn either Latin or Japanese through Hawaiian. And that's brought back Hawaiian, really in a substantial way. So I think it is possible, but it requires a lot of committed people and a complicated vision of everything that needs to be done. There's a whole lot of steps that need to be put together. So I think it's possible, but difficult.
There are an example. We have also language tests in Taiwan because we have been learning from Hawaii and also New Zealand, and we used to have master apprentice. There was a case where I met a man who was raised, he was Chinese originally, Taiwanese, raised by the Sanwa, and he was an elder when I met him in 2008. And I told him, your language is going to die if you don't do anything. And he came back to his village and he said, from now on, we are going to speak all in Samoa. He was the teacher, the informant of my student. And I came back there in 2017 or 18 to give classes. And I was really very amazed. They were in the village. I heard Samoa. But in 2008, they were just, not that many people. And my students said many of his informants also died in between. So that means that really you need by yourself, we were talking about that this morning. There's really need to be the desire, to want to learn or to want to speak the language. If you're not willing to, we can only help to preserve. But we cannot do the job for anybody else. So that's really comes from the population. The Sarawak were very successful. There have been many other, well, there's another place which I really love. It's the Kahabu. I helped a young girl making a picture book, and she loved the language. She can draw, and she learned the language very well. She's not Kahabu, but now she has 40 Kahabu and Kazakh behind her, learning the language with her. In 3 months, she just learned the language. She learned also Southern Min that she could not speak, and she is the best representative for non-governmental revitalization process. And in my eyes, wow, she's doing such a good job. She's only 29.
I have a question to Professor Elizabeth. I'm now learning Sakizaya, and in your PPT you said that in linguistic opinion, they consider there's 15 languages and 44 dialects. And in governmental opinion, there's 16 languages and 42 dialects, and they consider Sakizaya is a language. So I have a question of why linguistics did not consider that Sakizaya is a language.
No, I have some answer, of course. I know the answer. It must have been an ethnic group, but as you know, there were, uprisings and suppressions and repressions from the government. We know that during the Qing dynasty, some ethnic groups, they were chased and they had to, go into other tribes to, find refuge. I think Sakizaya, this is exactly what happened. There must have been some Sakizaya running to the Kavalan and others going to the Amis. And I actually supervised a PhD on Sakizaya. And so I have some knowledge about this language. And I also helped my French colleagues start on Northern Amis and also took classes on Amis. So when I look at the three languages, at Northern Amis, Central Amis and Sakizaya, it's difficult to say it's a different language. You can only say it's now it's a dialect. It must have been, a different ethnic group. But now, if you want to say this is completely different language, well, you're going to have to to try very hard. Of course, we know that they have some distinctions. For example, they don't have U, they have Mu, but Azay doesn't have Mu. They don't have they have Mu. So I think that really that's the difference between ethnic group and language. And we tend to see, language and ethnic groups. This is exactly what I was saying about Taukas. My former assistant said she's Taukas, which I agree, she's Taukas, I know. But they don't speak Taukas. But she said, yes, they speak Taukas. And they don't speak Siraya, by the way. They're just relearning. And about Siraya, it's not Siraya, it's another language like what. So, everything is so much mixed up, and we have to, go through very carefully and, try to see. I was in the Sakizaya ethnic group in, I think it was June, and the Sapur for us, we're not Sakizaya, we are Panza.
Okay, thank you.
So I said, what do you think? Panza or Sakizaya?
Would I just add one thing? That is that there's never a single answer to the question, are these the same language or not? Because so many factors come into play. If we take a European example, in Yugoslavia, there was a single language called Serbo-Croatian when Yugoslavia existed, which could be written with the Cyrillic script, mostly Serbs spoke that, or with the Latin script, mostly Croats did that. After the breakup of Yugoslavia, that broke up into Serbian, Croatian, then Bosnian, then Montenegrin. There's 4 languages from one that made up some new words, but not many. And if you ask a linguist to go in, even leaving aside political considerations, we've got many different criteria we use. One is, what's the percentage of shared words? Do we decide it's a different language when it falls below 90% or 85% or 80%? It'll be hard to say. And what about the grammar? Can we write a single grammar of all the varieties with just a few little notes when they differ? What if those pull in different directions? So Kaido, the language I mentioned, I wrote a grammar of that. There was a grammar of Yugla, which is very different in its grammar, but shares 90% of its vocabulary, and people can talk to each other fine, but the languages, structures are different. So it's wrong to think there can ever be a yes-no answer. Often the reason for those disagreements is because different people are making a different criteria the number one criteria. And then political criteria like we're a different claim to them, or we're in this islands and they're in the lowlands, or whatever, start to come into play. So I think that it's not a question whether there will ever be one answer.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the implications of urbanization and language shift and revitalization and native languages in general. So this is basically a follow-up to the first question, and also about Dr. Zeitoun's slide about how industrialization led to the population transfer from rural areas to urban areas. And I would like to refer to your page 28 about minority languages being fed by, not by big languages, but by a monolingual mindset. I would like to ask whether that is also spearheaded by urban areas being a huge factor, a huge resource center, and a power center in general, because as you said, Papua New Guinea is one of the most linguistically diverse places in the world, but it also happens to be the least urbanized country in the world as well. So I was wondering whether there's a correlation between the two. And also, when we talked about how there are several cultures that value multilingualism, and when these cultures, like say if they're in Papua New Guinea, if they move to the capital, Port Moresby, and their descendants start to speak Topisin because because urban centers, there is such a amalgamation of such a cultural part of so many different ethnic groups, and you meet someone from a different ethnic group who speaks a different language, and naturally you wouldn't be able to pass it down your heritage language indefinitely. So this caused that urban areas, they typically just speak one language in general, in this case, lingua franca with the TLPC. I was wondering whether there are any implications on that, and also on page 29, page 29, about how many foundations they helped people from rural areas and assisted in their revitalization efforts. That's basically resources from urban areas being sent to these rural areas to help their efforts. I was wondering if you could have any comments on that. Sorry.
Thank you for that question. Or those questions, I should say. So it's a very interesting and complex issue because what you say is true in a way that, for example, if we start with Papua New Guinea and then work away from there, if you look in a city like the capital city, Port Moresby, nowadays there's lots of cross-ethnic marriages where the parents speak different languages and their children typically grow up speaking TLPC and not their parents' mother tongues. But then where I work, which is a rural area, the parents there also almost always marry different languages. And the children learn both their parents' languages and all four of their grandparents' languages. So it's not simply the fact of having parents who speak different languages which results in this difference in outcome. Because it's a shift in how the practice of what you speak changes. In the village, husband and wife can be in the same bed, each maintaining their own language, each speaking the other's language. There are exchanges across from village to village where children will spend time with one, sometimes the other. It's sort of unthinkable that you wouldn't learn all of those languages. People just do it. Whereas in the city, but also in some rural parts of Papua New Guinea, this practice associated with many large cities in the world is happening. That is, you take a sort of lingua franca, which might be English or TLPC or Spanish in many parts of Latin America and so on, is happening. But that's not an automatic consequence of urbanization either. So if you go to some large Indian cities like Hyderabad, for example, or cities in like a city like Mysore, there are families there which moved there 500 years ago from another part of India, and they still speak their ancestral language as well as the language of Mysore. So in language like Hyderabad, people will typically speak 4, 5, 6 languages, including an ancestral language, and that's just what you do. It's taken for granted. Same in some parts of Africa. So there's something different about how people are regarding what you should do. It's not an automatic consequence of urbanization. The last thing I'd say on that is that it's one further reason why people abandon their ancestral languages when they're drawn into the big city is they're not together. There's not like a part of the city where they all live. So you can't just hear the language around you. Just go into the house next door to your auntie's place, ask her for something, all of those things that maintain the language. But there are some areas, for example, in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, I've got a little part of the book about that, where the city was aware of that problem and they gave districts of the city for people from particular tribal groups to have, so that they can have a sort of part of their tribal group in the city. But there's many, many answers to the question, there is a general tendency along the lines you mentioned, but it's by no means just automatic that things will go that way. I can't comment at all on the Chinese situation. Thank you very much.
I think.
Could I just ask a very short question? I have a question for Professor Evans. I'm just wondering, in your own language learning experience, and you were talking about the different direction systems. So when you were learning the Australian Aboriginal languages, where you have the absolute direction system, but coming from an English speaker, where you actually have the relative direction system, how does it work? And do you actually become better in terms of the absolute direction system? You know the north, the south, comparison with the left and the right.
You do. I mean, it was really hard at the beginning, obviously, because you have to pay attention, and I wasn't very good at it. But it's making a fool of myself, which you always do when you learn another language, and people laugh at you. And sometimes I would get it wrong, and I wasn't sure if I got it wrong because I made a grammatical error, or I pronounced it wrong, or I just didn't know where the north was. And then I began asking people about different things, so that, for example, my tribal father-in-law was a blind man, and I wondered how he knew. And I asked him, and he said, "Oh, it's all right. Every morning my family takes me out from inside the house, and I sit in the sun, and I feel the rays of the rising sun warm one side of my body, and I know that that's where the east is, and then I'm set up for the day." And people tell you stories like they'll talk about a dream, and then in a dream they'll say where things were and north, south, east. And gradually you realise that you just participate in conversations, and they'll just say, "Oh, that east uncle there," or something. You go around and think, well, which one's the east uncle? And this one. Or people will gesture, and they say, "The east one," because there's different distances, or the east one on this side, and many of these things. So you gradually pay attention to the gesture as well. So just like any skill that at the beginning is very hard, you learn it, and after a while it just becomes automatic. I wouldn't say I was ever as good as quite people, but it just, you get better than you were at the start. And then that transfers, afterwards, you just become better at it than you would have been if you hadn't learned the language.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay, I have to say this is not planned, but I would like to express what I learned, the central idea from your talk, from Professors Evans and Professor Qi. So what I learned is to preserve languages of tribes is a real act to respect every tribe of people. Okay, so this is what I learned. And could I say it in Chinese?
Please do.
今天晚上我学到的东西不是事先我所要计划要学到的，但是我深深的体会，保护语言是保护各族的人类最实际的行动之一。那另外一个语言，我要用台语来讲，我的 third language, my mother language。今仔日我真欢喜，学一项物件，就是你若保护语言，是一个真正行动去保护每族的人民，这是上好的尊敬。And last but not least, I find one secret of the name of the book. And in Chinese Mandarin, and in my mother language, they rhyme. So can I say it to you? Please do. Okay, the name of the book, okay, is called 一词一宇宙. Actually, the original name is Words of Wonder, and it has been translated perfectly. But if I translate 一词一宇宙 into 台语, it is called 一词一宇宙, and they rhyme. 一词一宇宙, they rhyme. Okay, thank you very much.
It's a book by the translator. She found that
unexpected result. Yeah, before, I thank you for your very humorous final talk. I call it talk. So before we finish this forum, may I again take my advantage as being the chair. I would like to ask Professor Evans a very important question, which might affect Taiwan's future. In 2018, Taiwanese government has a new policy which calls 2030 bilingual nation policy. In this new policy, try to promote English as a very important language in Taiwan. And the government started to ask the elementary school to teach as many as English in many different disciplines as possible. And also, I think this new policy imposed a lot of huge impact on Taiwan local languages. And a lot of people who try to promote the preservation of the languages feel very anxious. So I would like to ask your opinions. In the face of the superpower of English, would you like to suggest to Taiwanese government and the general public how we can preserve our local language better in the educational system in Taiwan?
Thank you. Look, it's a really important question, and I think it's a question faced in many areas. Sometimes it's seen as a false choice. That is, you've got your own language as a country or whatever, and they do it in this case, which of course is a huge language, and then a global language, and they're very local languages. And it's often seen as you have an overcrowded school curriculum. Which one are we going to choose? In Australia, the form that takes is because we don't typically have Aboriginal languages taught in schools. It's started to change, but people say, why learn an Aboriginal language? Maybe there's 2 or 3 old people, or no one left, or at most 300 people, or you could learn Mandarin or something like that and talk to 1 billion people. Of course you should learn Mandarin. Don't waste time on indigenous languages. It's not impossible to do both. And partly it depends on how many hours, partly it depends on what you do with those things, how inspiring the curriculum is, because you can spend thousands of hours in a classroom. If it's not well taught, they're wasted. I have friends from Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, who spent thousands of hours being exposed to Russian under the Warsaw Pact. They hate the language, they don't speak it, they don't know anything, but they didn't want to. But if it's taught well, people love it. And the real challenge is, I would think that there needs to be a 3-language policy where there's an indigenous language, not just for tribal people, not just for Aborigines, but for other Taiwanese who might have a gene, or they might just feel, I want to belong here, I want to know what it's been like here 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, to feel that sense of continuity. So I don't think that's impossible, but it's hugely difficult. And in many countries, I don't know how it is here, if you look at the proportion of the curriculum spent on language, that's going down and down and down compared to other things. Because people don't see it as real learning in the way that studying some other fields is, economics, maths. But I think that's a big mistake. So another part of the answer is giving sufficient space in the curriculum, but doing it well. So those are all elements that would be part of an answer. I don't have a simple answer, but that's what I would say there.
Thank you very much. I'm very satisfied with the answer. Okay, I think the time is up, and I would like to again thank two professors who participated in this very interesting forum, and also I would like to thank all the participants here, and also our director of the University, National Taiwan University Press. Thank you for giving us this chance to having this book. This is really a wonderful event. All of us gathered together. And also here, I would like to, Cai Yajing, the translator, would you like to stand up and say hello to everyone?
Yeah, because before I came here, since I've been living in Hong Kong for a while, so before I came here, I did prepare something to talk about in the beginning. So first of all, I would like to thank Professor William Wong, who is now gone, because it was his idea for me to translate this book. And also, I really want to appreciate Professor Evans' trust for putting the life of his beautifully written book in my hands. So in Chinese, we often talk about three difficulties of translation. So faithfulness, expressiveness, elegance. So in Chinese, this is known as 信达雅. So for your information, so these three criteria was proposed by Yan Hu in 1898 when he translated Thomas Huxley's Evolution and Ethics in Chinese. So this is in Chinese is known as 特虚拟偏演论. So he proposed the three difficulties of translation. So because Professor Evans mentioned that the translation is unfaithful to the original, the translation is unfaithful to the original. So apparently I didn't abide by the first principle. And for elegance, these professor...
No, I said that the original was unfaithful to the translation, which is that the translation is superior to the original.
Yeah. But anyway, so for faithfulness, probably I didn't do a good job. And for elegance, because Professor Evans' original is full of charm and humor. And I think when this was translated into another language, maybe something will be lost. But I would say that hopefully I have achieved the only goal, the only principle of expressiveness in making clear the idea of the beauty, the wonder of linguistic diversity that Professor Evans has so successfully demonstrates throughout his work. Thank you.
When I was a university student, Professor Shi taught social linguistics in our institute, in our department. But for another class, yeah, so I would ask her to just say hello, and you didn't have to say anything, just Professor Shi Yuhui. She is also a Taiwan University, Shidang.
I'm sorry, I didn't prepare to talk at all. I just sit there, enjoy all the talk. And I was teaching linguistics and teaching English as a second language. And now I'm already retired, and my mind is almost retired. So I sit here, just enjoy it. And I think many points they talk about is important. At least, try to ask everybody, pay attention to different language and the variety and the beauty of the different languages. I think that's important. And Professor Chiang mentioned about the bilingual policy. I think they probably won't really go to the extreme of the bilingual. It will probably just say English will be important. Eventually, most people will, just like now, students can choose another language besides Mandarin. I think they won't go too far. If they go too far, people will express their viewpoint, or maybe they will fight. Okay, so I hope everybody, just like me, enjoyed tonight's forum. I learned a lot. Some things start to come back to my mind. Thank you very much.
If you haven't bought this book, please try to buy one. And this is, I would like to say this is the best book I've ever read in recent years. Really, really wonderful book. It's very, very poetic and good translation. And I remember this year when I started to write the preface, the place where I live was under construction. My neighborhood put a lot of noise, so I just brought the draft to different places, and I watched every page by every page, and I would say, wow, wow, all the time. So I would like to just promote this book once again, and please try to buy one. This is really, really a very, very good book. Thank you very much. And,